Welcome to Shoot This Now, the podcast where every week we talk about stories that should be made into TV shows or movies. My name is Tim Malloy. Our guest this week is Leon Neyfakh, host of the outstanding podcast Slow Burn. Slow Burn is a must-listen if you like history, if you like politics, scandal, or just knowing how human beings work. Last season was about Watergate. This season is about the Clinton-Lewinsky situation. And if you're like me, you would have probably said a few months ago that you didn't want to hear anything else ever about the Clinton-Lewinsky situation. That was before Slow Burn. Leon and his team have managed to make this story fascinating again. They found angles no one else has found. They found frames that are completely different. It'll make you rethink a lot of what you thought about that whole situation. My co-host Matt Donnelly is not here this week because he is on, I'm not supposed to talk about this, but a secret mission for peace. If you'd like to know more about that, you should follow us at Shoot This Now Pod. Follow us at Shoot This Now Pod, I guess I should say. Subscribe to us on iTunes. Subscribe to us on Spotify. There's a lot of cool stuff coming to this podcast, but you might miss it if you don't do those things. If you can throw us 5 stars while you're there, that would be great. We'd be really happy. The music this week comes from the Ghetto Boys. They're great. I hope you'll refamiliarize yourself with their work because we may be talking about them very soon on a future episode. Finally, one last thing. Matt has asked me not to tell you that his secret mission for peace involves Beyonce. Okay. My wife, who works in branding, always says not to drop too many calls to action because people will forget them. So if I can just try to summarize everything we've talked about, Ghetto Boys, Matt Donnelly is a spy for Beyonce. Follow us, subscribe, all that good stuff. And here is our awesome guest, Leon Neyfakh, host of Slow Burn. I'm really impressed with all the new ways you found to tell the Clinton-Lewinsky story because I remember covering it as kind of a cub reporter, nowhere near the center of the action. I was getting local reaction to everything that was happening.
Where were you?
I was at the Associated Press in Phoenix.
Okay, cool.
They would send me out to nursing homes and bars and things like that to see how his statements were playing with the public.
Mm-hmm.
It was fun.
How old are you when you did that?
I was like 22 or 23, and one thing I specifically remember is something you talk about in your latest episode, which is the speech where Bill Clinton finally admitted wrong. But he said, at the same time, the Starr investigation has gone too far. They're harassing my family and friends. And I remember being sent out to a retirement home to get reaction to that speech, and a woman who looked at the screen and said, there it is. He apologized. Like, let's move on. That's it.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, I think there was a disconnect between how people in DC perceived that speech and how regular people did, because I think in DC, particularly even Democrats who felt like he had lied to them and felt like he was, what he really owed people was a sort of a purely just basically they're looking for a pure apology with nothing else attached to it, but instead he obviously took the opportunity to kind of protest the investigation, and I think that rubbed people the wrong way. But then, as it turned out, the folks who watched from home didn't seem to mind.
I also remember being really surprised at the number of people who said, "Oh, he's a man. That's what men do."
Yeah. The next episode we're doing for next week is sort of like a mirror image of the episode we just did, where it's kind of about the reaction on the left, with a focus on feminists. There was a big debate sort of about, among liberals who supported Clinton about whether, this was something that required, judgment, or whether it was something that, should be left to him and his family to deal with. And, if Hillary was okay with it, then why shouldn't everybody else be? But yeah, I think the sort of men will be men argument was definitely one that.
It was a weird time to be a neutral, unbiased reporter, because in my heart, I'm a, 22-year-old who definitely leaned left and was horrified by the whole thing. I was like, no, this is terrible. Monica Lewinsky's about my age. This is completely wrong. Why isn't he going down for this?
And did you feel, was that what was the sort of the core of your anger? Was it that she was so young? Was it that he just cheated on his wife? Was it that he lied? Or what was the... Well, do you remember what the core of or was it all the above?
The core of it was really that he lied under oath, and that I thought it was incredibly selfish for him to risk his entire agenda for something as tawdry as this, that it was really selfish for him to not be able to control himself when there was so much at stake for so many people. And
Hmm.
and of course, if you're, I was just kind of a total Boy Scout about you don't lie under oath. I mean,
Hmm.
I'd been deposed in a college journalism lawsuit, and so I took really seriously
Oh, wow.
the idea of you have to tell the truth under oath. You can't. And speaking of truth, on this podcast, we talk about stories that should be made into movies and TV shows. Have you gotten any Hollywood interest in turning any of your stories into movies or TV shows? It seems like there are a lot of different angles and mini stories within Slow Burn that could be turned into stories. I'm thinking of Martha, the very first episode, the latest episode with Bob and Bill Bennett, the two brothers who are at odds. It just seems like there's a lot of things that could be televised or on the big screen.
Yeah, so we've had some conversations with people, mostly on the TV side. Nothing to report yet, but I've always felt like that there were, as you said, a bunch of different movies that could kind of be kind of picked out of these episodes. I think the Martha one, as you mentioned, is probably the biggest no-brainer to me. Like, she's just such a larger than life character that you can imagine. Just really zooming in on her story and kind of trying to tell the story of Watergate through her. Yeah, personally, I think it would work great. I've never had any experience with Hollywood before, and the one thing I knew going into it was that I forget the exact quote and I forget where it comes from, but someone said, like, Hollywood will only make a movie if they run out of reasons not to. meaning it can go wrong at every stage of the process, and you can't count on it until you see the credits roll.
One of my favorite things about the podcast is how you make me see people in a different light and surprise me. It seems like your impressions have changed of Monica Lewinsky, of Bill Clinton. Can you talk about the people who kind of surprised you the most as you learn more about them?
Yeah, I mean, so when this first happened, I was a kid, right? So I was in 1998. I was in 8th grade, and I think most of my political intuitions came from just my parents largely, and so to me it was just like sort of a kind of an assumed fact of life that Clinton was our guy, and the people who were going after him were were doing so out of opportunism and political calculation, right? So, I think my evolution on this, I guess, since I started working on the show, has kind of shifted to, yes, the people who were going after him were doing so out of political opportunism in many cases, but that doesn't mean that his behavior is beyond judgment or is, should automatically be excused. I had always thought of Monica Lewinsky as someone who'd been a victim of the media, for sure, in terms of how she was portrayed, in terms of how, her identity was sort of frozen in time as a result of just how famous she was immediately as soon as the story broke. I guess I did not have any appreciation for how long the affair went on. I guess I didn't really know. I actually caught myself wondering, well, what when I realized it had gone on for more than a year, well over a year, if you include sort of all the on and off periods. I was stunned to find out how long it went on, and then I was also sort of taken aback by how hard she took it. Not because she's so such a fragile flower, but because Clinton really kind of strung her along. There was a period when she after she was transferred out of the White House into a job at the Pentagon, which is where she met Linda Tripp. She was really desperately trying to get back into the White House. To kind of was hoping that Clinton, once he was reelected in 1996, that he would bring her back, because that's what he told her was, or at least that's how she remembers it. We can be reunited. And it really just drove her up the wall, I think, and it made her extremely, drove her to real despair. And I think reading about that, and I've not interviewed Monica Lewinsky, but I've sort of tried to piece together her account through, looking at her grand jury testimony and looking at the biography that was written about her, Monica's Story, in which she participated, watching 20 years ago. It just kind of drove home for me, like, oh, this desperation that she felt, this total lack of control that she felt over the relationship. This is why you don't do this with someone so much younger than you and so much less powerful than you, because it inevitably kind of turns it into a one-sided thing where one person has all the power, and the relationship has to sort of play out on that person's terms.
Absolutely. I didn't realize until your latest episode that she thought at one point she would spend the rest of her life with him, or wanted to spend the rest of her life with him. That's something that she says after she agrees to cooperate with Ken Starr's investigation. How did you find that? How did you learn that?
That was a quote from her biography. She said that to her biographer. There's like other places where she said, or maybe her friends sort of testified, I think, to the fact that she was, and maybe this is partly something that Linda Tripp also heard her say and then repeated, that she was like partly imagining pushing him around in a wheelchair when he was old, and I'm not sure she thought about it as like concretely or as literally as, oh, like he will leave, he will like actually leave Hillary Clinton for me. I don't know how specific her kind of fantasy on that count got, but she certainly didn't think of it as like as just a sex thing. It was definitely very much an emotional affair for her.
See, this is what's really good about Slow Burn. When I ask you for a source on something, you have 3 sources. I think you definitely passed the Woodward test.
I am proud to say that we have not had to correct anything since the show started, which is a point of pride.
When you talked to Linda Tripp, it seemed like you guys kind of had a nice rapport.
Yeah, we had a nice chat. I spent a lot of time talking to her. In addition to the sort of 2 hour conversation that we had the night that I first called her, and ended up sort of quasi interviewing her over the course of this phone call. She had said at the beginning of the call that she did not want to participate in the show, but we hadn't really established terms. We hadn't said anything was off the record, so I started recording the call, and I talk about this in the episode. And I kind of did that because I kind of thought, well, this might be my only shot. After she hangs up, I might never speak to her again. And who knows what she'll say? So I just wanted to have it just in case. And my thought was, well, if I fail to get her to sit for an interview, then we can start thinking about whether this ill-begotten tape can be used in the show. But as it turned out, I was sort of spared the moral choice by virtue of her agreeing to let me come see her. And so first I went up to her horse farm and spent better part of a day there just hanging out and talking. I mean, it wasn't as casual as I'm making it sound, but it was not on the record. It was sort of not an interview. It was just like her trying to size me up, essentially, and to decide whether she wanted to trust me with her story. And by the end of that day, she had decided that she felt comfortable going forward. And so a couple of days later, my producer, Andrew Parsons, and I came back and did a formal interview. So all that's to say, I spent many hours talking to her, and I think it's really hard if you spend that many hours with someone, someone bearing their soul, to not come away with a real sort of vivid sense of their humanity. And, even someone as, I use this phrase in the show, like even as someone as cartoonishly villainous as Linda Tripp, you spend that much time with her and you realize, maybe she made really bad decisions. Maybe she kind of acted, deceptively in a way that I would never do, and in a way that I think she shouldn't have. But I was sort of convinced that, at least in her mind, she wasn't doing something evil. She was doing something that she knew was wrong, and that she felt guilty about while she was doing it, but that she thought was sort of a means to an end. I think she was wrong. I think she was wrong about that. The notion that she was helping Monica Lewinsky by doing this seems insane.